Selma, welcome. How are you doing?
Hi. Uh,
Hey,
Good. Exhausted, but good.
exhausted after the work day.
Oh yeah, yeah. Basically from one project particularly. And you?
Oh, yeah, I'm too. Like that's I had meetings today from I think the first student was like at 6, and now
Oh,
till now I still have meetings. It's so yeah, quite
you're
a
like
crazy
a
day.
marathon. You're doing a meetings marathon.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, let's see. So how is your today we're gonna discuss testing and how are your testing abilities?
You mean Apex test class?
Yes, yes.
Oh, terrible. Terrible. Since the last time that we together on one-on-one did like a test class, I really didn't try it out again. And on my job, I had like a one developer from other department. He's a true developer, so he's not Salesforce developer, but he is a
Okay.
developer. So he figured out that he could write some Apex code, and he did it, but without a test. And I was like, yes, I'm gonna take this ticket. And I was like, oh my God, I have no idea where to start. And then I was reading a lot of on the internet, trying out, yeah, brainstorming. And then after 2 days, I was like, okay, let's write something. So I tried it out. I gave my best and it didn't work because I really did. I thought like I need to create a lot of records before I come to the object. And then I asked my boss, who's really like like you, he studied IT and he knows to code, but he's not a proficient so much, but he understands. And I was like, please help me out. I have no idea where I'm stuck. So he looked at the code, make it correction, like a bunch of code lines were just not necessary there, not important. And then he showed me how to test it in a debug. I mean, in Salesforce, we didn't had any Visual Studio Code or any other tool. And we didn't pass at the first. So, like when you go to the test, there were like, I guess, three options, like run all tests or something run partial tests. And then we managed at the second or third option. So we get these 70% coverage that you have to have in order to push the test class. So it was an experience. And since then, I haven't tried because I told myself I have to go through all these lessons of Apex before I really tackle test
Hmm.
classes.
I see. I see. This is a nice story. IT, welcome. Welcome. So today we're doing testing and
Hello.
y- hey, hey. So yeah, I totally can understand this feeling with tests. Um, the but like when I start teaching, I did not expect that tests will be actually one of like the harder topics that people have. I suspect that there's a reason behind it. And the reason is that you need to invert your thinking from producing, like from actively doing the code to like basically being on the execution of the code side, right? So basically kind of like thinking as a user, but as a code user. So this is my theory why it's hard. Um, Today I'm gonna show you how to do like a simple one. And then let's see if you have any like more specific examples. We can also test something that's a little bit more specific. Um, Eti, how good are you with the testing? Nice background, by the way. Yeah, you're muted.
Thank you. Yeah. I like space and stuff like that. Thank you. For me, not good, I have to say. I think maybe because I have to invert my thinking, like you said, I kind of think of it as like a last thing I have to do in order to move it from one org to another instead of test-driven mindset. So I have a poor implementation of it.
Okay, okay, so got it. So if you have any cases, I'm happy to discuss them. Let me share my screen and then show the how. Thank you for enabling the camera. That makes it a bit more alive. So okay, let's create. First, I'm gonna create a new class. So I'm gonna call it Apex testing examples. And let's say it's gonna be public boolean, and let's say it's gonna be. Let's say we're gonna test the method which is called contains word test string. And then the only thing that this method is going to be doing is it's going to return true if this string here, word to test. If this string here, if that contains an actual string test, then we're going to return true, right? So contains test like this. All right, so this is a very simple method. There's nothing too crazy. Tina, welcome. And now we're gonna need to create a new Apex class. And usually, so the best practice for naming your tests is just you create a new Apex class, and then at the end you just write test. There's a lot of the like different approaches. I've seen also that you can write something like this, test. That's also possible. Just don't write it in the beginning. That's basically the only
Yeah, I've
best
seen
practice.
people say, hey, put capital letters in the beginning, test, and then when you're searching in VS Code, all the tests come up. But I didn't like it. I like what you've done more for sure.
Yeah, because you can just put into different folders. You can just go create here a folder and call it tests, and then you can put their classes. So you don't have to arrange it based on the names.
Well, I never thought of that. Okay, thanks.
Okay. Now the first thing that we need to do is to say here is test. You can write is test with a small one. I am used to write with a big one. Doesn't really change anything. And now here's always when I always forget the exact definition of tests. Like I could never in 5 years I could never learn, is it public static void or is it just public void, whatever. I don't really remember. But let's call it public static and then see if that works. Or does anyone remember? Public static. Let's look it up. Do I have some tests here? No, I don't even have tests here. Whatever. Doesn't matter. Let's see. And then the way you name your tests is usually you take the name of your method. So usually there are different types of tests that you can do. In this case, we're going to do the simplest one. And that's going to be we're going to be testing this method. And then you put the underscore, and then you say other unit test, or you specify here what kind of test you do. So for example, we're going to be testing for the positive outcomes. You're going to understand what it means just in a second. So there are a couple of, as I already mentioned, there are a couple of types of tests. And the most important types of tests are integration tests, and unit tests. Not to confuse integration tests with anything to do with integrations with APIs and HTTP calls. No, that's nothing to do with it. Integration tests, maybe here's integration tests versus unit tests. This is usually the pyramid that people write, right? So we have unit tests, integration tests, end-to-end tests, and UI tests. In Salesforce, UI tests, you can forget about them. End-to-end tests, okay, they don't differ that much from integration tests. So usually in Salesforce, we have the bottom two. And here, I think this is a way better, actually, image that I have. This one. So you can see that here is not very cheap to cheap to expensive, and quick to slow, right? So basically, the difference between those is that the unit tests, they cherry pick methods and they like test like very granular. Does the method work? And they test in terms of with the input that they give, is the output correct? They don't think about like a business process level. They like think about like very precise, specific things. And then with the integration tests, they test already the business process. So they test already like the general process that you have. So if you don't have anything super complex, then you're only gonna have unit tests. And you can absolutely go with the to the coverage with the unit tests, right? So all of them, they add to the unit tests. It's just usually the matter of how well tested you want to have your system. If you just care about passing the 75%, then unit tests will be quite sufficient, all right? And there's nothing bad in wanting to just pass the 75% because we actually want to deploy code. And if you already tested with the end user and the end user client says, hey, it works, just deploy it to me and I want to use it, then just deploy it and you want to use it, right? So we don't really necessarily need to go into the software engineering mindset and like over-engineer thing when we don't have to. But it's nice to know that there are a couple of different ways to test something. So in this case, because our method is so simple, we don't have any business process, we don't have any triggers, integrations, queuables, and all of that, we can't even do any integration tests. We can only do the unit test. And in the unit test, you can test for multiple things. So you can test for positive outcomes, for the negative outcomes. You can test for edge cases, and then you can take for like something like system overload. I'm not really sure the precise naming of that. And I'm going to show you what each of them mean basically. And I see that Tina says this. Thank you, Tina. Okay, so let's do the test here. The setup of a test is usually the same. So you always like this, you can basically do it as a structure all the time. So you can say here test.start test and test.stop test. And then you're definitely going to have some kind of assert r equals. Previously, before a couple of updates ago, we used to test everything with the system.assert. And if you ask ChatGPT, most likely ChatGPT is going to give you this system.assert thing because ChatGPT is not aware of new addition, or at least it's not that much present in the training set. But this is how you should be. This is the best practice. Assert are equal. This is the best practice to use. Okay, so what we're going to be doing, right? So we need to instantiate this this class. So Apex testing examples equal to new examples. Now we need to pass there some kind of word, and let's say string word would be equal to I don't know, I love testing Apex, like this. And now we want to call this contains word, right? So we take this Boolean result. Doesn't matter how we call this variable, but we just need to call this method that we are trying to test, count words test, and then we pass the word there. And then we just need to compare, okay, what is the expected result here? The expected result should be false. So we can say we expect here false, and then we have a result like this. And then this part we can also simplify because we can say is false result, right? So we expect that the result is false. So this assert method, it basically just shows you if the test is passed or not passed, right? Let me execute this thing. Test, new run, and Apex. Okay, and we see that okay, so here it works. Now, how can you actually come up with this code, right? Because I'm putting here a lot of stuff, blah, 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 start test, stop test. the way you come up with what you need to write in this test is that you forget about that you're testing, and you go here to the debug console, and then you think about how would you actually check if your code works, right? So you wrote this, how would you check that it works? Well, you'd probably do something similar, right? So you'd probably create here a new instance, then you would execute your new method that you created, and then you'd probably system.debug result. And then you would execute and see, okay, so the result is actually, the result is false. If I change it to testing Apex, then the result will be probably true. True, right? But you cannot really test it all the time like this. You need some kind of automatic way, because you basically all the time you're doing the same thing. You're just changing the values and then running the Apex code. So you come up with like something like this is where you create a test, and you put your code into the test. And then in this test, basically, test can be in only two stages, two statuses. It's either failed or it passed. And the way to control this failed or passed, here we can see that it passed, but it can also fail, right? So in order to control if the method fails or passes, you have this assert is false. If you remove this assert is false, if we let's remove everything, right? If we just put this, our test always gonna pass, because we don't have any condition that can fail the method, fail the test. So we need to have some kind of condition. So let's say here I'm gonna, what do we even expect here, right? So we just execute here the script. We don't even put it out. So that's gonna be always true. So now we need to say here, okay, assert is false. So in this case, we expect that it's gonna be false, and the result's gonna be false, right? And this we can call that this is a negative outcome, right? So we're testing that something is false. And then we can just multiply this, copy this, and say, okay, now we're gonna have here test. So we're gonna have positive case. And now here we expect that this thing is gonna be is true. Okay, how does it sound so far? Like, do you have any questions, something to go over?
I think, well, for me, I feel like testing feels like really, how to say, like I need to, if you write a class or method, when you're doing testing, you need to rewrite it again.
No, not necessarily. So like, for example, here, right? So we have our method.
Mm-hmm.
It only returns true or false, right? We don't rewrite it here, but you need to use it. So you don't need to rewrite it, but you need to use this class.
Is there any any way to be automatically create all those test classes based on the existing class?
ChatGPT, I guess. So you can you can use ChatGPT for that. So the short answer is no, because because you don't really know what exactly is the logic in your class, right? So in order to properly test it, you need to think about what is the positive outcome of your test, what is the negative outcome, right? And then you can also think about some edge cases. So you need to understand the logic basically to write something.
Well, this is just a very short piece of code. But if the code is really long, and then the test class will be, do you have to make it a few classes? Or, I mean, if like the code is 100 lines or more, the test code will be really long, isn't it?
I would say it depends a little bit on the test how like what exactly cause the test the class is doing, because yes, it might be long. So if your class is more than 100 lines, it should be refactored into method. If your method is more than 100 lines, it should be refactored into being the less than 100 lines, because 100 lines it's already kind of on the level where you should start thinking about refactoring your code. So in general, yeah, you should not definitely should not write methods that are that long, especially 200 lines. That's definitely should be refactored. But if you inherit already a code that is bad and already like 200, 300, I had code that is like 2000 lines, one method, and you have to write for this for this thing a test. Then yeah, the test might get a little bit long. That's true. We can't really avoid it.
So the one we are doing is manual testing. Is there any way to automate the testing? I mean, automated testing, I don't know how to describe it. Just make the testing not like we need to manually input so many things.
This is automated testing. So this is
Oh.
not manual testing.
Oh.
This is automated testing because you're now, yeah, you do need to write it once. But once you wrote it, those tests are there and you can run them all the time automatically. So why do we need tests, right? Why do we need them in general, except the rule? By the way, Carlo, welcome. So this is your code, right? So you have your code here. Or the code bait, you wrote something. And then you write tests, and you know that those tests, they cover this code that you wrote, right? Now, 3 months after, someone goes and modifies your code to be a little bit different, right? So now it's a little bit different. Now, if you have tests for everything that is the most important, the core parts of your functionality, your tests, they should start failing, which is a good behavior. Like failing tests is not bad. Failing tests is good because it signals you that something has changed in the system from the time you wrote the tests. So this is your code in the system. You change the code, and if you, by some mistake, if you modify the most important parts of your functionality in the company, then your test should be ideally starting failing and not allow the developer to put the bugs into the production, right? So this is why we need those tests. So you write them once, and then they are already there. So they are automatically checking all the time when developers, they do some kind of modification to the system. They all the time they check if that's correct, if that didn't destroy anything important.
So sorry. Do you mean after we write the testing classes and then we don't need to run it, it will just run it all the time?
Well, we run it all the time, right? But we don't have to write them again and again and again, right? Because they're
Okay,
already in
got
the
it.
system.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is automated testing.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
Just a question, please. So like let's say you have like a handler class and it has 70 methods. Like it's a lot, but I've seen it once. And then suddenly you write a new a method in the handler. And then do you then create individual test classes each time, or do you just keep updating the handler test class every time a method is added from the original class? You then go to the handler class and add that test method in the test class. Is that how you would recommend it?
Yeah, usually in this case, if you have a handler, you test each individual. You have 70 methods there, so you test each of them, right? So you might have quite a bit of test methods. And then if you add a new method to the handler, then you also add a new method to the test,
Just
to the
keep
test
adding it.
class.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So collaboration is going to be important if you have like a team of like 7 or something, and then you kind of maybe working on similar stories inside the same object.
Yeah, usually you
mhm.
don't you try not to distribute the tickets in the way that that you work
Yeah.
at the same overlapping functionality, because it definitely reduces the collaboration.
Yeah. The structure of the test classes, should it be always assemble, test, and verify, those kind of 3 structures, or is it not necessary to always follow that structure?
What do you mean by the test and verify?
So in a test class, I've previously heard, everyone seems to have a different opinion, so I'm just asking around. Assemble the data, test the data, and then verify the results. Is that like a common structure that you would recommend?
Yeah, it's pretty much the common structure, because it allows you to easily also visually
Okay.
separate the different staging of your basically testing logic. Like here I have all my data, then here I actually do the testing, and then there I have all my verification methods, verification stuff.
Okay, nice. And sorry, just the final one. That screenshot I posted just now, do you ever recommend using those other asserts? Or is it only we don't need the other ones really?
Yeah, no, definitely use them. They are all good. So the whole, whatever works. So assert class, Apex, whatever works from those methods, they're all good. And it is indeed the best practice to use those that fit into what you're trying to do, because it's easy to read basically what's going on here, right? Is false or are equal, are not equal, way better than what we used to have with the system.assert.
Cool. All right. Thank you very much.
Right. Carlo, welcome. How is your testing in Apex?
Non-existent, because I haven't gotten there yet. So yeah.
I see. Okay.
But I do have a question though.
Yeah.
Well, coming from, I have no idea about testing in Apex. Like, what's a good test and a bad test? Like, how do you look at it? You look at a test and you think, ugh, this is a really bad one. How can you tell?
Yeah, this is really good. This is really good. Let me 1 second. Let me think, because there's a lot of that coming into this, and nice to see you with the camera. So there's a lot of that coming basically into this consideration. You know, there's this philosophical question: when you write the test and the test doesn't fail, is it a good test or is it a bad test? Because the purpose of a test is actually spotting bugs, right? And making sure that you're developing something that fits, right? So like the purpose is like catching bugs and also ensuring that your system works, doesn't change this too much to the status like future, right? So whenever you write a test that works, you're like, okay, I wrote a test that works, and did it give me any new information? Not really, right? So just knew that it works. So I guess the more like, this is more like philosophical question, but like more real, like from the Apex perspective, the good Apex test, it definitely should test for the business logic itself, right? So not when we when we try to just somehow do the code coverage, because if you remove, this is life hack that people do all the time. They remove this part, they just execute the code without checking the end result, like the result of the execution, and those methods they test, they cannot fail because they just execute the code, and that's it. So you kind of produce more test coverage without actually testing the logic itself if the result of your execution is correct. That's not a good way, right? So for example, this one, if we remove assert, it's just always gonna run no matter what will be the result. Even if the result's gonna be wrong, still gonna be running all the time, as soon as like the main method doesn't fail.
Okay.
right? So we definitely need asserts, and then we also definitely need test.start test and test.stop test. Now, in this example, it's a little bit hard to see what's going on. Why do we need those start and stop tests? But imagine we have a super complex business process that we are testing, right? Imagine we have something that calls integration, sends an email, executes a couple of triggers. We're going to be using a lot of different limits here, right? So let's say here we are using 90 out of 100 limits, whatever limit it is, right? Let's say %. Probably to execute such a thing, we would need to set up a lot of additional records. This is something that Selma mentioned at the beginning, that before you can even execute the test, you need to set up a lot of different records and a lot of different data. Maybe you need to insert opportunities, but then you have to insert opportunities and accounts, and then with accounts, contacts, and all of that, right? So you need to do a lot of stuff. So before you can even execute your main logic that you're testing, there's possibility that you would use, like, let's say 50 out of 100% limits. And then if you're going to proceed executing your main logic that you're testing, that requires on its own like 90% of the limits. So it doesn't add up. You're gonna go into the exception, right? Because what, 50 plus 90 was that 140, I guess. That's gonna just say, okay, limit exceeded. I know what can be limit. I know DML limit, whatever, exception. So what you actually want to have is that you want to isolate your business logic in terms of the limits, transactions, and all of that. And this test.start test, it resets all the limits, and it basically starts a new transaction within a test. So if your business logic that you're trying to test is this method, you need to put it into the start test and stop test. And this is a sign of a good Apex test, I guess.
Okay.
Igor, how about those try and catch? Do you suggest to use them?
Yeah, let's see what the example that you gave there.
I just couldn't understand them.
It was here, right? Okay. Try catch. Okay, so this is just try catch, right? So it's not really related to the tests. It just related to the exceptions.
Yeah, exceptions.
Okay, yeah, let's discuss exceptions. Let's first discuss finish with tests, and then discuss those exceptions. Okay, so any questions to this type of tests so far?
Just one.
Yeah.
Igor, sometimes I see in test classes, after the first line that says at is test, then in the brackets, see all data equal true.
Yeah.
Can you give us like a explanation when to use this, when not to use this? So
Yeah.
data equal true.
Yeah, never. That's an easy answer, just never. If you see this is a sign of someone who is not experienced with like writing tests. Why it's bad? So basically this thing, it allows you to access all your records in the system. Now the problem when your test method relies on the records, it's quite bad, because the records, as you're going to be pushing your test through the sandboxes, the records going to be changing. So they're never going to be the same. And especially if they're going to be in production, they're also going to, like, the records that this method was relying on, that's going to be just different records. So this is very bad. Like, if you see that, that's not good. So don't use it.
Thank you.
Good. And then I also wanted to point out that we tested here for is true, and then we can also test for edge cases. And edge cases can be something strange. Can be, for example, if here we put an empty string, right? Something like this. Or maybe we want to put a string that is super huge that exceeds the limit of a string, whatever. Like we want to put some kind of unexpected edge cases that can happen. Maybe we also want to test it for null, for example, here, which is also a way, right? But in general, when you have a method and you want to write a test for it, you don't need to think about all these different approaches. How can you make the output like this, like this, like this? And usually, from my experience, when you think about this use case and when you actually write the test, you spot at least a couple of bugs for each of the functionality that you write. So it's usually the best way to actually catch some bugs before they end up somewhere in UAT or production. That's the way. Yeah, so this is just simple tests. Does anyone else has any question to the tests?
Just a quick one, mate. Would you recommend us to follow the same kind of structure? Meaning, like, let's say I have to write 5 test classes and I have a framework to follow, and I just edit and refactor and chop and change, or do you recommend kind of just from scratch every time for our level here?
No, I would say this is good. This is good. If you follow this structure, I think it's
okay, cool.
It's good. It's just the only one thing that this is the simple example, right? It gets a little bit more complicated as soon as you have records and objects and as objects. So with as objects, that gets a little bit more complicated. Yeah. We can discuss as objects or we can discuss exceptions. Who is for as objects and who?
Let's do today one subject and next time another.
Either
Okay.
of them for me, yeah.
Okay, then let's do as objects. So as objects is going to be a little bit complex. Okay, now let me think a little bit. So let me find this presentation that I have on tests. I think this is this one. Tests. Yep. One catch around those tests is that each of the tests executed separately, and they are executed in a secure environment. So whenever you insert something in the test, it will never be actually inserted into the system. The same as if you modify anything here, it won't affect anything in the system. Now let's find something simple that I could test. This is good, account service. Let's try to do this one. Open account service. This one, this is good, right? So it gets just a list of accounts and that's it. I'm gonna remove all of that. Let's actually create another one. Update descriptions and update. Let's just do it like this. That's fine. So we're gonna actually update those accounts. That's the only one difference that I want to have here. Okay, works. Now the structure stays the same, right? So we still have start test, stop test, and is, and let's say are equal here. So what is the idea behind this method? It gets a list and it updates the description. So we need to have this before and after. So let's create here an account that's not gonna have any description at all, right? List account accounts new. The reason why we use here list because that's what our method accepts, right? And accounts dot add, and now we need to put there an account. And let's create a new account here. Account, new account. And let's just add here a name as a required field. Let's say Igor. Account. Like this. So first we create an account, then we create a list, and now I'm gonna insert accounts so that we have them in the system. Description is empty. So now if we call this method update description from the account service, we expect that that the description will have some values. Let's do that, right? Service dot update description. And then we pass their accounts. You know what? I'm gonna modify this a little bit more. So I'm gonna put here account. Just want to simplify it so we go actually to the truth instead of using here lists and all that. So we just have one account. And then I update this account. And now let's just say system.debug, and I'm gonna print out this account. And I'm not gonna have any assert equal. Let's see. This is saved. Okay, this is not saved because we need to remove here. Okay. Update account. Okay, so now the only thing that it does just updates the description, and here should be working. Now let's run this method. Run. You can see it passes, right? So we didn't really check for anything. That's why it's passing, because we don't even have the logic for when we want to pass, when we want to fail this method. Now we can have a look at the debug logs, and we can see that description is actually filled out here, right? Updated on. So now we can go and say assert r equal account. Here we're gonna what we expect, right? So here on the left side, we write what we expect, account dot description. So I want to test the description behaves in the way we want. And for that, this is not a good example. This is not a good example. Let's do it. I'm gonna modify it even more. Date dot today, because with the with milliseconds, it's gonna be kind of a hard test to write. Does it work? Yep, it works. So now what we are expecting here to have on this side is this whole thing, right? We expected to see in the description. And this is what we write. So this is what we expect. This is what we have. And if they're both equal, then this whole assert is going to be true. So the test is still going to pass. But if they're not equal, this is going to be false. And that's going to make the test to fail. So I'm going to delete this part, save it. And now this is a proper test. So we can call it update description positive. Okay, now let's execute it. Okay, so nothing new, and here in the tests everything works. So far nothing new, right? Do you have any questions so far to this moment?
Ivan, I don't know if you've already talked about this, Why positive?
Positive because we're testing for the positive outcome, so that our whole test is what we expect it to be. Like, so we're testing that the outcome is the right outcome. Like, if we wanted to have a negative outcome, it would be something like, in this case, you can't even do the negative outcome actually. So let's just remove this idea. But in this one that we tested, in this one, the negative would be, the positive would be that it does contain test, and the negative, it does not contain the test.
Okay.
Right? But in this case, because we are only doing one modification, so we don't have any conditions for this modification, we modify everything, so we don't have like any negative outcome.
So this is a best practice?
Yeah, this is best practice for practicing for positive outcome, negative outcome, and some edge cases.
Okay, thanks.
Like, the absolute minimum to write for like one method would be probably one test like this with a positive, and then the better minimum is to write one positive, one negative, one edge case. That's usually what I aim for. Of course, if I have the budget for that, if the client, if I was paid for that. Okay, right now, let's say we want to do a similar one, right? But now we want to test a little bit more stuff. So now we want to say, okay, what if I gonna have here something in the description, something before method. In this case, I want to test that my method still works and that it actually overrides the whatever I had before here, right? Everything stays approximately the same, right? So let's see, what are the problems? Okay. It's called just unit test. Description unit test. Everything stays the same, and if I execute, I mean, still should work. Still works, okay? But you can see that though they are approximately the same, in both of them we insert an account. A few things, this account will never be inserted into the system, right? And we're kind of doing the same thing. So there's a special method for it. It's called setup method. And setup method, it's used if we have, let's say, 3-4 different data that we want to insert, then we use setup method. Because here it's quite simple. But what if we need to insert opportunities, contacts, accounts, leads, and like 5 different objects to just set up our whole data model? We would write the same code for each of the tests, and that would be just a huge duplicate everywhere. So definitely want to avoid it. So here we can write test setup, and I again always forget what's there. Let's say public static setup. Now we can take this thing and we can move it here into the test setup. And then we can delete it from here, but we need to query now this account all the time. So now we need to say select ID name description from account limit 1. So the reason why we need to do it is because each of those tests, it considered a separate transaction. And here's how it looks. Setup method executed before each of the tests. So setup is executed, then test number 1 is executed. Then setup is executed, then test number 2 is executed. And there's no intersection between those tests. Basically, all the time the new test is executed, you are completely clearing the transaction. So whatever modifications you've done to the same account on the test before, doesn't have any implications on all the next tests. You can really see it like in this. It sounds way more complex than, but it is like literally just this image where you have setup, then you insert something, opportunity or an account into the database, then you query it into the test, you execute the test, and then you move to the next test. But before you move, you clear the whole database of the execution. You can also visualize it that way, right? When you run the tests. The only one difficulty in that is that when you write the tests, you write just one setup method, right? So you cannot write here multiple setup methods. It's just like really this one setup method. And I think now it complains that static is not allowed. Public static void. So let's try to execute this one. Still works. Okay, so you have a setup method and then you have all your tests that you want. And this is the best practice. So the way we have it right now, this is the best practice. This is the way it should look in most cases. Now the questions to this part.
Can you send that code if you don't mind, please? Whenever you get a chance,
Sure.
it'd be nice to use it as a reference.
Sure,
Thank
no,
you.
I can. Any other questions, additions to this? Selma, does it answer the the direction that you went with your code on the job?
Yeah.
Like how far, like where in all of that, what was unclear?
Well, first of all, I wrote the first test without this access to, global records. And then my boss basically added it, and put this bad practice into it, as you just explained. And suddenly we hit the 70% coverage. So the test has been moved to production. But basically what we did, this developer wrote a trigger before delete trigger with just 8 lines of code on a custom object called like project something. So he wanted to prevent the deletion of a record if actual hours, a field called actual hours is empty. And it turns out that this test class was 50 lines long because we tested for like first create the record and try to delete, and then test if it's really deleted, then try not to delete. So, some versions, like very similar approach to what you said. My attempt to write the test class was like when I went into the Salesforce and tried to create the record for myself, one project record. I saw that I had to have a contact, then I have to have a count, and then I thought, oh, well, when you write a test class, you first have to initiate the contact creation and account creation and then project creation. But it turns out that in a real test class, I didn't need it, all that stuff. And that was confusing me. When you read what test class is, it's like you try to recreate a record, you basically never insert it, and then you test, is it failing, is it not failing, all these scenarios.
Yeah, you're trying to recreate the usage of your functionality, but from the code perspective.
Yeah.
So you're trying to think how the execution is gonna happen, and then you try to simulate this whole execution.
And for me, as a really beginner in this subject, what would be very helpful, and others might have a different opinion, is if we try out few simple cases, like you have a simple short Apex class, simple short trigger, and then you try to create a test class. it's easier to move to some advanced things when you have a basics. But if you don't understand the basics, you can show me a space shuttle and I would just look at it like some old Egyptian hieroglyphs, and I would not understand a thing, you know?
Yeah, I totally agree. So if you have any cases, I'm also happy to discuss them. So this is the case that we have right now. Yeah, you definitely with triggers. There's with triggers it's a little bit harder, because with triggers you cannot really do the unit test. With triggers you cannot like go and just test like one small part of it. You need to insert, like for example, you have a, let's say, after insert trigger, right? So you need to actually insert something into the system in order to fire the trigger. So that fires your whole business process. So we move into this, basically this image where you, instead of doing the unit tests, you're doing integration tests, right? So it's harder to write them. They are slower because they involve your whole business process instead of just one method. Yeah, so this is why triggers are a little bit complex to test. Integrations have also own like features where you have to basically simulate the API exchange, because you cannot make an actual call out from a test. Yeah, so there are like definitely like levels to what we discussed right now. But I would say if you apply this, like what we have here, if you apply it to the trigger, there's gonna be already testing a trigger, right? So
yeah.
And if you feel like it's quite hard with the setup, you don't need to use setup, right? So you can always just write whatever test works and then move it to the setup, if you feel like.
And I'm also of opinion that test class, you cannot really put in only one meeting, especially when you present that to beginners. And I really like, on a scale from 0 to 10, on a beginner scale, I'm like 0. So so that means I would like to hear it next time, or at any point in time, probably more than once, with some examples, or you can post it to a platform that we are on so that we can try out.
You need to go and try to write such a test. That would be the best.
Yes. Once I leave my fear out of my head, definitely.
Okay, anything else to that?
Question, Igor, do you recommend using Visual Studio Code for testing? Because I know they have some extensions where you can hit a button to run specific tests, and then they also have this extension that highlights your code coverage and stuff like that. Or should we stick to like the dev console?
Yeah, I use usually VS Code, but what you have here a nice feature where you can go here, for example, to this one, and you can select test coverage. You can see that this we didn't cover this one, but this lines we covered, right? So this is a very nice feature that we don't have in VS Code, like natively. But yeah, you can use both, whatever works. I'm just used to switching all the time to developer console. What I like is Illuminated Cloud. Like if you want to go to the next level of IDEA, like try out Illuminated Cloud from IntelliJ IDEA. It's the best IDEA for development, but it's also not beginner friendly, right? So it's quite complex, but it's way better. It's just the best on the market thing. It's also paid, both IntelliJ IDEA and Illuminated Cloud, but this is just next level. Like this is a proper how it feels to develop in other programming language. Like this is just a proper development environment, not VS Code. VS Code kind of like sucks a little bit.
Okay, cool.
All right. I see that we are on time. Thank you everyone for joining. And it was really nice to see you all, and then see you all next time.
So yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
See you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.